Good evening. I'm a 70-year-old woman. I guess at my age, it's more appropriate to introduce myself as an 70-year-old old woman. I used to have a daughter. She was taken away too soon, right in the prime of her life. My heart's had a gaping hole in it since she passed away. I've been floating through life as a lost soul. I had always wondered if I'd find solace in my last few remaining years. Well, that's what I'd like to tell you about today. I was thinking to tell my story if anyone is interested enough to listen. I hope I can reach others who may have gone through similar events. I'd like to start by talking a bit about my husband. I got married relatively early in life. I gave birth to my daughter while in my early 20s. My husband, who had a lung condition, died not too long after. I was a widowed mother at 22 years old. I thought medicine had advanced enough at that time to give him a shot at survival, or at least keep him around for longer. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. I still remember the shock and dread I felt when I first learned about his lung condition. No one was sure if it was because the disease advanced stages so quickly or we just caught it when it was already too late. He left me too soon. We said we'd spend the rest of our lives together. That dream never came true. I was only 22. He was 26. The doctors thought it may have stemmed from a work-related issue. They were never able to give a concrete answer about what caused his condition, but they believed it had something to do with an excessive intake of metal shavings in his lungs. He had been rapidly losing weight, constantly coughing, and even sometimes coughing up blood. It was only a matter of days between when he was first admitted into the hospital until they pronounced him dead. I was destroyed. It felt like all the life had been sucked from my body. If only I knew back then what life had in store for me. I had no idea that would be only the beginning of a life of suffering. My daughter was a 1-year-old at the time. She was adorable. She was always smiling and laughing. She would babble on as babies do as they're learning to talk. My heart was overflowing. My husband never got to see those precious moments. Thinking about that absolutely killed me. There were nights when I was holding my daughter and thought maybe it would be better if she and I both just died together. Those were simply intrusive thoughts. I could never do anything to take away my daughter's precious smile. I couldn't just leave her on her own either. If I chose to end my life to relieve the suffering I was feeling, I needed to put my head down and get through life no matter how tough or dark things might get. I had to do whatever it took to keep moving forward and endure whatever life threw at me. I had to stop making excuses. I needed to focus on keeping my daughter happy and healthy. I wanted to devote my life to making sure I raise her well. When my daughter was a teenager, she never had a rebellious phase. Some other children her age might resent and fight with their parents. My daughter never went through that. She was extremely mature for her age. One day, she even told me, "Mom, I'm so grateful for all the hard work you did to raise me into the person I am today. One day, I promise to somehow pay you back for everything you've done for me." She was the best child any parent could ever ask for. She did everything she was told and never fought with me, even once. How could she have turned out this perfect? I thought kids her age would want to spend most of their time with their friends. My daughter, on the other hand, would wake up every morning and get ready herself for school. She said she knew I was tired, so she wanted to make things easier for me, so she never asked me for help. Whenever I asked if she was going to hang out with her friends after school, she always told me that she was going to the library to study instead. She was always hitting the books. After high school, she went to one of the most prestigious universities in the state. She was beautiful and smart. She got a full ride to college because of the hard work she put into her studies. It was only after I dropped her off at college that I think everything is going to be okay. She turned out better than I could have ever dreamed. She was accepted into every college she applied for. Some of them were even Ivy League schools. However, She ended up at a school that was below some of the better schools she was accepted to because she wanted to receive scholarships. All of her teachers at school praised her for being such a wonderful person for choosing to go to college for free rather than going to one that may have been a better match academically for her. They all believed she had a bright future ahead of her. Thinking back on that time, that was when I first heard about a boy she was quite friendly with in one of her classes. Eventually, I met him when I was visiting her at college. It turned out they had actually been dating for quite some time. I heard he came from a stable family. He was raised by both of his parents. To be perfectly honest, I was quite worried. I was afraid my daughter would get hurt. On the surface, he seemed like a good kid. He came from a good family, studied hard, and made it into a good college. But my daughter was my whole world. She was my reason for living. It was terrifying to think that she might get hurt emotionally. However, it seemed like her boyfriend put her on a pedestal. He treated her right. In the beginning, I heard that my daughter told him she didn't have time to be in a relationship. Despite that, he kept chasing after her because he was head over heels for her. He would always show up and insist they ate together, even if it was in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant. That's how they ended up dating. He wasn't necessarily what concerned me. It was more about his family. They didn't exactly give her a warm welcome when she first met them or any time after. The boy's father was a CEO of a major company. His mother was a well-known fashion designer. I don't know the exact details, but it seemed like they didn't care about how wonderful my daughter was. They ignored her every time she was over. It really killed me to hear that. That wasn't the only thing I heard about them. One day, her boyfriend came over to our house. It was the first time he had ever been over. I wanted to show him how we were living. I don't think my daughter was too happy about it, though. I imagine she might have felt a bit embarrassed considering what kind of family he came from. Our lives were completely different. I sat down and had a serious conversation with him. I just wanted to put this out there so you knew. If your parents ever did anything to hurt my daughter, I will absolutely not tolerate it. My daughter's face turned bright red, as if to say, "Why would you say that?" She told me to cut it out and stop saying things like that. Despite my daughter's reaction, her boyfriend seemed to completely understand my concerns and what I was saying. He sat straight up and said to me, "I swear to you that I'll look after Maya. I promise to never let anything happen to her." I felt as though he'd wanted to say that to me for some time. As soon as he did, I saw a sense of relief on his face that he was able to express his feelings. A smile ran across his face. He looked confident and sincere about what he had just told me. In that moment, I could tell why my daughter was so fond of him. They ended up dating for over 3 years. When he came over one day to ask for permission to marry her, I was terrified. I still had no idea about what his parents were really like. What would they think about him marrying my daughter? I still had never met them in person up to that point. I was having so much anxiety over it. I wanted to know what kind of people his parents were. To be honest, I never thought they would still be together this long, let alone get married. But now, marriage was on the table. Despite my anxiety and gut-wrenching fear, I went to go meet his parents for the first time. They were as cold and impassive as I imagined they'd be. I tried my best to make conversation with them, but they'd give me short answers and didn't try to put any effort into getting to know me. We sat in silence for most of the time. It truly left like I was talking to a wall. They couldn't be bothered to try and talk with me. Even worse, it was clear they didn't like my daughter. It broke my heart to see them act so unkind to her. I was torn about whether or not they should move forward with their marriage. Judging by that interaction with his family, I wasn't assured that it was the right choice for my daughter. But she insisted that she wanted to get married. Her boyfriend also said how much he loved my daughter and that he wanted to marry her. They said they'd rather be dead if they can't be together. As a mother, I knew that if they were this upset about the thought of not being able to marry each other, I couldn't just ignore how they were feeling and oppose their marriage. I ultimately gave my consent for their marriage. I suggested that they shouldn't let me or his parents get in the way of their love for one another. I told them they had to do what they thought was right. They understood. Little by little, it seemed his parents understood as well. As a result, they ended up finally getting married. They were the happiest people on the planet that day. His parents and I may be completely different people and had opposing views on our children's marriage. But that didn't matter. All that mattered was if Maya and her husband were happy, and they were. As long as they were willing to put in the effort to make their marriage work. That's all I could ask for. Their love for one another that day brought me so much joy. Her new husband loved her more than anything in this world. I knew that even if his parents didn't necessarily approve of their marriage, he would do whatever it took to make sure things worked out. However, misfortune always has a way of coming when you least expect it. Not too long after their wedding, my daughter was often complaining that she wasn't feeling good. She said she constantly felt like she had the flu. She thought, maybe I'm pregnant? Is this how pregnant people feel? I went over as soon as I could to help them out around the house. When I got there, she told me, "It's not a baby. It's cancer. I have cancer." I can't believe it. One day I'm celebrating my wedding day and the next I'm being diagnosed with cancer. The doctors say I don't have much longer. When she was saying what the doctor told her, it felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. Pancreatic cancer. What? Why? My daughter was only 30. How could she have pancreatic cancer? I just couldn't understand. I cried and cried. No matter what my daughter said, the doctor told her I just couldn't process it. They say even young people can get it. That just didn't register with me at all. It was like she was speaking in a different language. It didn't make any sense. I cried my eyes out. I cried until my body couldn't produce any more tears. I was devastated. It was rare for someone her age to have gotten it. It was advancing quickly. I only have a few more months left to live. I couldn't comprehend that sentence. We tried a handful of treatments. If one didn't seem like it was having any effect, we'd move on to the next. But before I knew it, my sweet, beautiful daughter was getting thinner and thinner. I was a complete emotional wreck. I wasn't the only one going through this heartbreak. This was hitting her husband even harder. He fought to marry her because he was so madly in love with her. He stopped going to work. He became completely emotionless and hollow. I had to talk with him about this. You can't be like this. I know more than anyone how you're feeling right now. But you need to get it together and support my daughter. You won't be able to help her if you're jobless. I'll take care of her. You need to go back to work. However, he didn't listen. He couldn't bear to be apart from her for even a second. He ended up quitting his job. He couldn't even bring himself to talk with his parents and let them know what was happening. The pain he must have been feeling was immeasurable. I didn't really think about this at the time, but looking back on it now, they truly must have felt they were soulmates. So for him to see her health decline day by day the way it did, he must have totally lost his will to live. Barely any time had passed since they were married. I still hadn't gotten the chance to try and have a positive relationship with his parents. They probably would just thought my daughter was selfishly leaving their son behind. Even in the times when my daughter was close to the end with barely any strength to stand, they never called or came to visit her. They probably thought getting married was a mistake from the beginning, especially when their son's wife had cancer. In the honeymoon phase when they should have been enjoying their time as newlyweds. Instead, he was going through the heartache of losing his wife. My daughter passed away 6 months after the initial diagnosis from the doctor. The day of her wake was the worst day of my life. It was my final moment with my beloved daughter. I told myself I had to be strong and say my goodbyes, but instead, I just wept. I held her screaming that I couldn't believe she was gone. She was my entire world. First, I lost my husband, and then I lost my precious daughter. I did literally everything I could have possibly done to give her a good life. I took on all the pain so she could live a life of happiness. I did everything, and in the end, it meant nothing. I thought that I couldn't possibly feel sadness worse than when I lost my husband. Losing my daughter brought me to an unimaginably dark and lonely place. A few days had passed after her wake and funeral. I was back home after the worst week of my life. I organized all of her things that were still here. I called my son-in-law over to my house. I have something I want to talk to you about. We no longer have any connection to one another. You're about to start down a new path in your life. I'm going to try and do the same. If you find someone new, don't let anything stand in your way. I hope you'll be able to find someone as beautiful as my daughter. He burst into tears as I was telling him this. He put his head in his hands and kept saying, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." It was torture for him to think about finding someone other than Maya. I was even welling up myself seeing the state he was in. Just when I thought he was pulling it together, he left my house. He didn't even hear what I wanted to tell him. Later on, I gave him everything. I gave him my daughter's bank account information, the ATM card, and the lease agreement for their apartment that was in her name and some of her other personal possessions that I still had. I felt all of those things rightfully belonged to him. After taking care of that and tying up some loose ends, I moved back to my hometown in the countryside. It was where my daughter and I lived together when she was very little. It wasn't too far outside the city. It was such a wonderful place to raise her. We'd go on walks through the woods, catch frogs near the river. In spring, we'd lay in the grass and watch the clouds go by. We'd pick flowers together too. I wanted to go back there and surround myself with those memories. I thought it would be a good place to live out the rest of my years. I bought a dog and made a garden. The house I moved back into was old, but it was just enough for me and my pup. I saw my daughter in my dreams every night. She'd say things like, "Mom, I want you to be happy." Every night, I would hear her voice. I was both happy and heartbroken every morning when I'd wake up. Usually when people showed up in my dreams, they would just stand there and not do anything. But when my daughter appeared, she'd take my hand and say things like, "Mom, I want you to find happiness. Please be happy. It's what I want." I spent every day avoiding everyone I'd see. Eventually, the only conversations I'd have would be with my daughter in my dreams. People around my neighborhood knew about me and my situation, yet I never reached out to talk with them. I would hear some of the things they would say about me. Why is she leaving in that old run-down house? She should move back in the city and find some friends. Mother's Day came along. I'm not sure how he found out where I lived, but my daughter's husband had flowers delivered to my house. It wasn't only flowers, but there were presents too. Gift cards, chocolates, jewelry. I sent it all back to him. Of course, I appreciated him thinking about me and going out of his way to get me such thoughtful gifts. A part of me felt so bad for returning it all to him. But I knew that if he was sending me presents, it meant it was because he still hasn't gotten over my daughter's death. I wanted him to move on and find someone new. I knew that if he sent me things like this, he'd never be able to move on. Just the thought of him thinking of me was enough. I didn't need any of the things he sent to me. When someone as young as him loses his wife, if he doesn't start to move on, he'll spend the rest of his life in despair. That's why I sent all of it back to him. I didn't feel right accepting it. I tried calling him to say he needed to start mentally preparing himself to let go of my daughter. Unfortunately, he never answered the phone or returned my calls. I would have honestly preferred that he came to visit. I didn't need any of those presents. He sent back all of the things I returned to him. Why would he be so persistent in giving me these things I clearly didn't want? It wasn't just Mother's Day. It was also my birthday, Christmas, and the anniversary of my daughter's death. I returned everything he sent, and he just sent it right back to me. That continued for around 8 or 9 years until one day he stopped sending things altogether. I figured he'd finally given up after all this time. I wondered if he finally found someone new. I hoped he had found someone he cared for, someone who was happy and healthy that he could spend the rest of his life with. I prayed that he was able to start a family and that he found happiness. He really was a wonderful person. My daughter's death absolutely destroyed him, but he always took care of her. He never drank and would always help out around the house. He was a saint. Even to this day, I still think he was the best person for my daughter. Just when I thought things were settling down for me, things started changing around my town. When I originally moved back, it was still the quiet countryside town that I remembered. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case anymore. I heard there were plans that it would undergo development. From what I gathered, it sounded like someone bought a bunch of property and wanted to revitalize the area. Now there was traffic from all the cars that would come in to survey the land and plan for the development. It felt like things changed almost overnight. The development didn't directly affect me since I still owned the property I lived on, and that wasn't going to change. That's not to say I was living somewhere fancy or even somewhere a developer would be interested in buying. It was just an old house in the country. Simple as that. As the development went on, I noticed how many people were selling their houses. Housing prices went up because of the development, so it made a lot of people want to sell. I was the opposite. I wasn't leaving this house no matter what. When I moved into this house, I already decided that this would be the house I die in. It was the house my daughter took her first steps in. We kept record of her height in the doorframe. The markings were still there. That house was my last tangible connection I had with my daughter and husband. I couldn't bring myself to leave. This was the house I bought with my husband when we got married. It was the house I brought my daughter home to after she was born. Even if we only lived here for the first few years of her life, I couldn't stand the thought of leaving. I promised myself I'd be staying right here until the very end. That didn't stop the people around me from moving out of town. One by one, people kept leaving. One day, out of nowhere, a man in a suit showed up at my house. Right away, I had a bad feeling about him. I didn't know exactly what he came for, but I knew it wasn't going to be something I wanted to hear. He opened the gate to my house and walked through my garden to the front door. He told me, "We'll give you the best price for this house. We're planning to use this property for further developments. There's not much you can do to stop it. If you don't sell it to us now, it'll end up being taken from you by the government. You wouldn't want that, would you? I'm here to let you know that might happen to you. It seems like you don't understand these types of things, Grandma. If I were you, I'd be thankful I'm here right now. Like I said, we'll give you a great price if you sell it to us now." He was so pushy and rude. He was right, though. I had no idea about what was going to happen or the law in this type of situation. I was just a little old woman living on her own. How could I have known what the law says? I had no idea what to do. I was so scared. Despite that, I stood my ground. I didn't sell the house. I was scared and shaking, but I told him I had no intention whatsoever of selling this house. I told him to never come here again. It didn't matter how much money he said he'd buy the house for. It wasn't for sale. It doesn't matter if you want to sell it or not. The day's going to come where you have no choice but to sell it. Why not sell it now when you can still get good money for it? The government isn't going to give you even a quarter of what I'm offering once they seize this land. He went on. Everyone around you has been smart enough to take my deal. Why are you the only one that's being this stubborn? That wasn't the last I saw of him. He came 3 times a day, every day, to say his threats about how the government was going to seize my property. He said if I knew what was good for me, I should sell my house now. He grew more aggressive each time he came. He started to walk on my flowers and kick things around my garden. I was so frightened. Every time he came, he started with the same thing. This might be the last chance you have. Someone from the state is going to come knocking on your door any day now. I told him every time I still wasn't interested. I got more and more scared as the days went on. One day I worked up the courage to tell him off. Listen to me. I told you 1,000 times I'm not selling. How stupid are you? I raised my fist and made it seem like I was ready to hit him. He responded by saying, "Why are you so worked up? Stop screaming." He threatened to call the police. But I didn't care. I didn't lower my voice. I kept yelling and telling him to leave. This is more than just a house. I raised my daughter here. I have so many memories here. That's why I'll never sell it. Nothing I did stopped him from coming every day. More and more people kept selling their houses and leaving. It seemed like the company that guy worked for were really heartless. All they cared about was forcing people out of their homes. As if that wasn't enough to prove what an evil organization they were, the man who kept coming to my house kicked my dog on one occasion. My dog's name was Buddy. I got him when I was at my lowest point after my daughter's death. I needed something to pick me up out of the despair I was feeling. After my daughter passed away, Buddy was one of the last reasons I had to live anymore, and that horrible man kicked him as if he were a piece of garbage in his way. I ran over to Buddy and grabbed him and begged the man to stop. Buddy didn't. He kicked him again, even harder this time. He kicked him so hard that Buddy threw up on the ground. He died later that night. Buddy, I wept all night. That's what finally sent me over the edge. I vowed that I'd fight until the end for my house and never give in to that horrible man. I couldn't let him get away with what he'd done. I needed to figure out what the best approach would be. Should I take him on myself? Should I go to the police? How could I end this once and for all? The one thing I did know was that I couldn't go on any longer without taking action. 3 days later, I heard a knock at my door. I thought it was that wicked man again. I prepared myself for whatever was going to happen and went towards my door. I kept a metal baseball bat right at the front door. I made sure it was within arm's reach. My heart was pounding as I reached for the doorknob. I slowly opened the door. But it wasn't him. It was a friendly, elderly man from the neighborhood who I've talked to many times. He started by saying, "Why have you resisted so much about selling your house? Is there something wrong with it?" "No, there's nothing wrong with it," I said. The man was concerned that there might be a problem with my house, so he came over to check on it. I invited him inside. He continued, "Almost everyone's already left. It looks like you're the only one still here. The people from that building company have been forcing us out, saying that if we don't leave now, it's only a matter of time before the government comes in. It takes our houses. I was wondering why you haven't left yet, so I wanted to come over and see if everything was okay." My heart was still pounding from expecting that terrible man again. But as I was talking to this elderly man, I slowly felt a little more at ease. This was the first time someone had asked me if I was okay. I couldn't help myself. I started to cry in front of him. I never talked about anything deeper than the weather with this man, but now I was crying in front of him and telling him everything that was going on. Not only that, I told him everything about what happened in my life and what led me to coming back to live here. I also told him how I never talked with anyone else in the neighborhood. After all the terrible things that happened to me, I had put up walls to keep other people from getting close to me. "You've really had a rough life. I can tell that you've been through a lot." He was so kind. Talking with him touched my soul and took away some of the pain I was feeling. We talked a little bit more that day, and we really had a pleasant conversation. It was so pleasant that we agreed to meet for lunch the next day. That day, I was tossing and turning in bed. I was thinking too much, so I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about my husband, about my daughter. I wondering if they found each other up in heaven. I wondered if they were together spending their time with one another. I thought, I'd really like to go and meet them. I prayed that day would come soon. There was only one reason that kept from taking my own life. I was afraid that if I did, it would mean I wouldn't be able to meet my daughter up in heaven. I was afraid that taking my life when my time hadn't come yet would mean I wouldn't get the privilege of seeing her. The thought of not being reunited with my daughter or husband was the sole reason that kept me alive. Eventually, I got to sleep. That night, I saw my daughter's husband in my dream. It had been so long since I had seen him. I thought I'd forgotten what he looked like, but there he was. In fact, he had a frustrated look on his face. He said to me, "Why are you here? Go be with your family." I died peacefully in that dream. I woke up the next day with mixed emotions. I didn't want to dwell on for it for too long. I had a guest coming over later, so I had to get started on straightening up. I tidied up around the house and got some sandwiches ready for lunch. Something didn't feel quite right about eating and spending time inside the house. Instead, I set up a table in the garden. My new friend came in the afternoon. He was around 10 years older than me, but he was living on his own too. I thought it would be nice for two lonely people from the neighborhood to share a meal together. As soon as he came, he said to me, "Why aren't we eating in the house?" I told him, "Well, it's a beautiful day, so I thought we could have lunch outside." I felt a change in his attitude from yesterday. His demeanor wasn't as kind as it was the day before. It was a little odd. I told him to have a seat and to start eating. I went inside to get a pitcher of iced tea. He didn't say a word. He only started at me as I walked inside. I wondered if something happened to make him act that way. Some time passed, and then he asked, "What's it like, living here on your own? Aren't you lonely here all by yourself?" I'd certainly be lonely if I lived here alone. I didn't quite hear what he said at first, but I replied, "It's lonely and quite hard. But I have no choice but to live my life one day at a time." After that, the conversation got more and more peculiar. "Don't you think it's important for a man and a woman to live together? Helping one another, sleeping in the same bed?" I didn't quite understand where he was coming from. It was very odd. Then he got up, came next to me and put his hand on my thigh. Whenever I hear about this type of thing happening to other women, up until now, I thought, why don't they ever say anything? Why do they keep quiet when that happens? I finally understood. My whole body went still and my throat dried up. I was afraid. I had no idea what was going on. I felt frozen. I couldn't do anything. He grabbed my arm. I thought to myself, this is what women have had to go through for years and years. He looked at me like I was his prey. I started to shake. I was able to muster enough strength to say, "Stop it." At that moment, I heard a voice in the distance scream, "Hey!" I heard the same voice. "What do you think you're doing?" He ran up to the old man and punched him right in the face. It was the first time I had ever seen someone get punched in person. At that moment, it dawned on me how lucky I was not to have let that man into my house. I cried and could barely catch my breath. I was also grateful I left the gate unlocked, which let the person come save me, and that the garden could be seen from the street. The table flipped, and the food went everywhere. The old man fell to the ground. He was screaming, "Ah, stop it! You're gonna kill me!" Everything was happening so fast. I still couldn't tell who punched the old man. I grabbed the person's arm and looked up at his face. I knew immediately who it was. It had been years since I had seen him, but I knew right away it was my daughter's husband. I couldn't believe it. It was really him. How? "Why are you here?" I could manage to get out. Tears were welling up in my eyes. I felt so relieved, but I pounded the ground screaming and bawling my eyes out. When I looked up, I saw that the old man had run away. I heard my son-in-law's voice. "Mom, are you okay?" He helped me up off the ground. When I asked him why he'd come here, he said he's been wondering all this time how I'd been living, so he came to see for himself. He said that since I kept returning everything I sent for Mother's Day, my birthday, the anniversary of Maya's passing, he felt it was best not to get too close. He didn't think that's what I wanted if I was going through the trouble of refusing all of his gifts. In order not to bother me, he has been watching from a distance. He knew I was living alone. He watched from afar to make sure I was doing okay. He had been watching over me for some time. "I told you to find someone else," I told him. "I told you to find yourself a beautiful wife and start a family. Why are you bothering with me? I don't have much time left on this earth. But you do. You need to move on." We both cried together as I said that to him. Through his tears, he replied, "I made a promise to your daughter before she passed away. She said to me, 'I'm leaving my mother behind. I want to make sure she's taken care of after I'm gone. Please look after her for me. No matter what happens, please make sure she's okay.' I had to keep my promise to her." He wiped away his tears and pulled something from his bag. It was an envelope. "Mom, I bought all of the property in the town. All of it. Those people who have been coming around are pure evil. They're trying to scam all the elderly people who live here. They were never planning to develop any of this land. They're trying to buy up all of it from everyone for cheap and then resell it." I couldn't believe what he was telling me. I didn't understand. How could he have bought all of it? That's impossible. I asked him, "What are you saying? Why did you buy all of this land?" He laughed at my question. He continued, "Mom, I'm very wealthy now. I didn't waste a dime of that money you gave me back when Maya died. I've been working so hard every day of my life since then. I swear I didn't steal it or do anything bad to get it. I earned every cent of it with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I bought a small warehouse, got a bunch of certifications, and took some classes, and eventually hired my own staff. I started my own export business and made a lot of money from it. It was all thanks to you and that money I could use as a backup in case anything went south for me. I came here to repay you. It all felt like a dream." Tears were streaming down my face as he was telling me all of this. He went on, "Please, I'm begging you. Don't avoid me for any longer. Don't focus only on losing your daughter. I want you to know that you've gained a son. The whole way here, I was a nervous wreck trying to imagine how it would play telling you all of this. I thought maybe you'd refuse to meet with me. I didn't expect I'd have to make an entrance the way I did. But none of that matters anymore. Mom, please. Live with me and let me watch over you like I promised Mia." I was speechless. He still had a full life ahead of him. He was young, and I was just an old woman near the end. Was he sure he wanted to live together? I would feel so guilty. I thought it would be best to refuse his offer. I couldn't look him in the eye when I told him I didn't think it was a good idea. He bent down on one knee next to me. "Mom, I made a promise to Maya. I can't accept no for an answer. We have to figure something out right here, right now. If you don't want to come live in the city with me, I understand. Instead, I can remodel this house for you. It's a bit old and really needs some fixing up. I've already looked into it. I have an architect I've been talking with, and he said he'd agree to give this house a makeover. I'm sure it was fine to live in at one time or another, but that's not the case anymore. It looks ready to fall apart any second. I can't have you keep living here alone the way it is now. Please, at the very least, let me fix up the house for you." I knew that if I told him no again, it would hurt him. Plus, to be honest, I didn't think he'd even accept no as an answer. I owed him so much for coming to my rescue in my time of need. I agreed to his offer. He cried tears of joy and thanked me for agreeing. It must have really weighed down on him thinking about me living on my own. He really wanted to make sure I'd taken care of. Things were really busy from that day. So many people came to the house to start the remodeling. The architect my son-in-law chose was apparently very famous. He asked me if there were any parts of the house I'd like to have preserved. I said the door frame that had my daughter's growth markings and the wall in her old bedroom that she wrote on with crayons. He said he'd be able to put both of those things into my new bedroom. I wish I could show you the pictures of the transformation the house went through. Construction was finished before I knew it. When it was officially complete, my son-in-law showed me the finished product. He asked me what I thought of it. I broke down crying. He worked so hard to provide a wonderful new place for me to live. I was in awe of how he took care of everything. He was so busy with running his own company, and yet he still was on the phone with the construction company every day, making sure things were going smoothly. He meant it when he said he was going to look after me. He went above and beyond. On move, in day, he took care of everything. He moved all the boxes, furniture, and unpacked everything for me. He even slept on the couch that night. I slept upstairs in my new room. While lying in bed, I looked at a picture of my husband. I said to myself, "My dear, you really put me through a lot. Not to mention our daughter who had to grow up without a father. I wonder if marrying you was really the right decision. I lost you and our daughter. Most of my life has been pain and suffering, but our son-in-law has really stepped up to look after me. Even though he's not our real son, he's so kind to me. I have no idea how I'm going to repay him for all that he's done for me." I cried and cried all night long. I swore that I'd be willing to accept help from my son-in-law. I thought of him as my child. He could never replace Maya, but he treated me like I was his real mother, and I thought of him as my son from that day forward. The next morning, I told him, "There hasn't been a day that's gone by that I haven't felt the pain of losing Maya, but that's not what she would have wanted. I know you've been through the same pain, and yet the only thing that was on your mind was me and making sure I was okay. I should have taken all the gifts you sent me. I'm so sorry I didn't. I never imagined life would end up like this. Back then, all I wanted was for you to find happiness. I thought that meant you finding someone new, getting married, and starting your own family. There's still time for you. I truly think of you as my family now. I want you to think of me as your new mother from this day forward." He gave me a hug and said, "Mom, I'll do whatever it takes to make you proud. I'll never forget Maya. It hurts me just as much. But that's not going to stop me from doing everything I can to give you a good life. You've faced so many hardships in your life. You deserve happiness finally. I'll make sure of it." He kissed me on the forehead and gave me a gentle smile. Our relationship is as good, if not better, than a real family. I cherish all the time we spend together. He comes over every weekend to check up on me. He takes care of any work that needs to be done around the house. He fixes things, moves things around for me, and helps me with whatever I need. He's my guardian angel. He even gets me out of the house once in a while. He brings me sightseeing since I don't get out of the house much on my own. Not only that, he took care of all the planning for me and some friends to go on vacation. If you ask 100 people what their relationship with their family is like, you'll probably get 100 different answers. If you ask me, the relationship with my son-in-law couldn't be any stronger even if he were my actual child. I don't have enough time left on this earth to tell him how thankful I am that he's in my life. I love him as if he were my own son. I feel embarrassed that I've taken so much of his help, but haven't been able to give anything back in return. The least I can do is get his favorite foods cooked and ready for when he comes over for his weekend visits. Thank you for listening to the long story of my life.